"Wrong gun, sweetheart." The sneer came from the range's most celebrated exhibition shooter, a man who lived on applause and VIP admiration, as he glanced at the outdated rifle in the woman's hands. To everyone watching, she was a complete outsider. No sponsors, no record, no name worth checking, already cast as the afternoon's entertainment. No one knew she had once belonged to a long-range weapons program erased from every official system, where shooters weren't trained to impress, but to end things with a single round. When she refused to change rifles and chose to fire standing at 1,000 yards, laughter still lingered in the air. Then the distant metal rang out, and every mocking voice on the range went dead silent. Kaylin stepped out of her old pickup and shut the door with a quiet thud that barely carried over the low hum of expensive engines idling in the Apex Ridge parking lot. The place sat high in the hills outside Denver, all polished concrete and glass, the kind of private range where membership started at 6 figures, and the waiting list was longer than most people's mortgages. A valet named Jared, barely 20 and looking sharp in a red vest, rushed over to intercept her before she could lock the truck. He scanned the rusted wheel wells and the dented bumper with a look of undisguised disgust, holding his hand up like a traffic cop stopping a pileup. He pointed aggressively toward a gravel overflow lot nearly a quarter-mile down the hill, shouting over the engine of a nearby Porsche that guests with oversized or non-aesthetic vehicles were prohibited from the main pavement to preserve the ambiance for the Platinum members. He didn't wait for an answer, turning his back on her to open the door for a man in a tailored suit, practically bowing as he accepted a $20 tip, leaving Kaylin to shoulder her gear and walk the long, uphill trudge through the dust while the valet and the member shared a laugh, pointing briefly in her direction. She wore faded jeans, a plain gray long-sleeve shirt tucked in just enough to look neat, and boots that had walked more miles than anyone there could guess. Her dark hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, no makeup, no jewelry except a thin silver band on her left hand that caught the sun for half a second before she turned away. She carried one soft rifle case, scuffed and patched with duct tape in places, and a small canvas bag that held exactly what she needed and nothing more. At the security checkpoint just inside the glass double doors, a guard with a thick neck and a tactical vest that looked freshly unboxed stepped directly into her path, blocking the scanner. He demanded she place her bag on the table, then proceeded to dump the contents out rather than inspecting them, letting her spotting scope and ammunition boxes clatter loudly across the metal surface. He picked up her wind meter, an older scratched analog model, and held it up for his partner to see, shaking his head with a theatrical sigh, as if he'd found contraband. He took his time running the wand over her body, pausing unnecessarily long to critique the wear on her belt holster, before sweeping her belongings into a chaotic pile at the edge of the table and telling her to move it along, because actual paying customers were waiting behind her. Inside the main building, the air smelled like gun oil and new leather. A handful of VIPs lounged near the coffee bar, all designer rangewear and $1,000 optics dangling from their necks like status symbols. A group of women seated on plush leather sofas near the window, sipping espressos and scrolling through tablets, went quiet as Kaylin passed. One of them, wearing a pristine white shooting jacket that had clearly never seen gunpowder residue, leaned in to whisper loud enough to be heard, questioning why the facility was allowing maintenance staff to carry weapons in the lounge. Her companion giggled, pulling her legs up onto the couch as if avoiding a spill, and remarked that the membership committee was clearly slipping if they were letting people in who looked like they'd just come from a construction site. Kaylin walked straight to the check-in counter, slid her driver's license across, and asked for a lane on the long-range course. The young guy behind the desk glanced at her, then at the case, and hesitated just long enough for her to notice. He stamped the form anyway and waved her through. Before she could reach for her license, a floor manager with slicked back hair and a badge that read Director of Member Experience intercepted the young employee's hand, sliding the ID back toward Kaylin with 2 fingers as if it were contaminated. He didn't look at her, focusing instead on a smudge on the granite countertop, and informed her in a monotone voice that the long-range lanes were currently reserved for precision-qualified individuals and that perhaps she would be more comfortable on the 25-yard pistol range where the targets were larger and the expectations lower. He slid a glossy brochure across the counter, advertising a beginner's safety course for civilians, tapping the price tag with his fingernail, implying that even the discount rate might be a stretch for her budget. all while maintaining a plastic condescending smile that never reached his eyes. She chose lane 7, unzipped the case, and pulled out an older bolt-action rifle, woodstock worn smooth, no fancy chassis, no high-end scope with turrets big as shot glasses. Just iron sights and a sling she wrapped around her arm the old way. A young woman with a massive social media following and a camera crew trailing her drifted into Kaylin's personal space, using the lane divider as a prop for her live stream. She angled her phone so her followers could see Kaylin's equipment in the background, making an exaggerated sad face for the camera while pointing at the duct tape on Kaylin's rifle case. She narrated to her thousands of viewers that it was so inspiring to see the budget community trying their best, framing Kaylin not as a fellow shooter, but as a charity case or a prop for her own benevolence. She even reached out to touch the worn wood of Kaylin's stock without asking, treating the weapon like an antique curiosity in a petting zoo, until the cold indifference in Kaylin's posture made her pull back with a nervous, offended huff. Brant Holloway was already on the line, running an exhibition for a cluster of sponsors and influencers. 46, broad-shouldered, salt and pepper beard trimmed perfect. He wore a custom jersey with his logo stitched across the chest. Cameras followed his every move. When he caught sight of Kaylin setting up, he paused mid-sentence, looked at the rifle in her hands, and let out that loud, carrying laugh. "Wrong gun, sweetheart?" The words bounced off the concrete walls. A couple of the VIPs turned, smirks already forming. One of them, a tech investor in brand new tactical pants that still had the creases, lifted his phone to record. Brant kept going, playing to the small crowd. "That thing's fine for punching paper at 300 maybe. You sure you're in the right place?" Brant's spotter, a wiry man surrounded by 3 different ballistic computers and a weather station on a tripod, didn't even bother to look up from his screens. He simply waved a hand in Kaylin's direction and called out that he was picking up severe ballistic incompetence in the atmosphere. He loudly joked that they should probably evacuate the adjacent lanes because a barrel that old likely had microfractures that would turn the rifle into a pipe bomb the moment she pulled the trigger. The entourage erupted in laughter, and the spotter high-fived the tech investor, neither of them noticing that Kaylin was checking her chamber with a fluidity and precision that their digital simulations could never replicate. Kaylin didn't look up right away. She ran a patch through the bore, slow and deliberate, then loaded 5 rounds into the internal magazine, the brass clicking softly. Only then did she meet his eyes, calm and steady. "I'm sure." Brant raised an eyebrow, enjoying the moment. He turned to the group. "Tell you what, let the lady shoot. We could all use a good laugh before the real work starts." One of Brant's major sponsors, a heavyset man chewing on an unlit cigar, stepped forward and offered to make things interesting. He pulled a thick roll of cash from his pocket, peeling off $100 bills with theatrical slowness, and slammed them onto the shooting bench next to Kaylin's elbow. He announced to the room that he'd pay $500 for every hit she made past 600 yards, but for every miss, she had to clean his custom rifle afterwards. He leaned in close, exhaling the smell of stale tobacco and expensive cologne, grinning as he told her it was the easiest money a girl like her would ever make, treating the challenge not as a test of skill, but as a way to buy her dignity for the afternoon entertainment. Cyrus Vane, the range owner, strolled over at that point. 52, former military instructor who'd left the service under a cloud nobody talked about anymore, now dressed in pressed khakis and a polo with the Apex Ridge crest. He carried authority the way other people carry wallets, always ready to flash it. He studied Kaylin for a second, lips pursed. "Ma'am, the advanced lanes require approved equipment lists. That rifle doesn't meet current standards for anything past mid-range." Cyrus snapped his fingers at a junior range officer, ordering him to bring over the liability waiver for substandard equipment, a form that didn't actually exist until that moment. He made a show of clicking his pen, demanding Kaylin recite the serial number of her optic, and when she pointed to the iron sights, he dropped the pen on the clipboard with a clatter of exaggerated disbelief. He looked around at the VIPs, shaking his head as if he were dealing with a toddler trying to drive a car, and loudly stated that he couldn't have his insurance premium skyrocketing just because someone was too stubborn to use a scope, essentially framing her mere presence as a financial risk to everyone in the room. Kaylin closed the bolt gently. "I'm not competing, just want to zero and confirm drop at distance." Cyrus exchanged a look with Brant, the kind men share when they've already decided how a conversation ends. He shrugged. Fine, let her burn some ammo, just don't hold up the line. As she finalized her stance, a range technician accidentally kicked the leg of her shooting bench while walking past, jarring her equipment and sending her small box of ammunition sliding toward the edge. He didn't apologize, didn't even stop, just muttered, "Watch your space," as if she were the one encroaching. It was a petty physical violation of the shooter's sanctuary, a deliberate attempt to spike her heart rate and break her concentration before she could even settle in. Kaylin didn't flinch or look at him. She simply reached out a steady hand, caught the box before it fell, and placed it back in its exact position without breaking her visual lock on the target line. Marlowe Kitt, the head range officer, stepped in to log her onto the electronic board. 39, lean, clipboard always in hand, he prided himself on knowing every shooter with a verified record. He typed her name, Kaylin Rourke, and frowned when nothing populated in the database. No prior scores on file. You sure you want to log this session publicly? She nodded once. Log it. Marlowe hesitated, then hit enter. The screen flashed her name in plain text, no rankings, no sponsor tags, no follower count. A couple of the younger shooters nearby snickered. One of them, a trust fund kid with a custom rifle that cost more than most cars, leaned over to his buddy. Bet she can't even hit the berm at 1,000. Kaylin picked up her ear protection, slipped it on, and walked to the firing line. The wind picked up outside, whipping dust across the range, flags snapping hard. Perfect, she thought, though she gave no sign. Brant called over to the control booth. Hey, let's make this interesting. Set a plate at 1,000 for her, the small one. The booth operator grinned and keyed the command. Downrange, a steel silhouette no bigger than a dinner plate swung into position at exactly 1,000 yards. The crowd murmured approval. Standing shot at that distance offhand, with irons and wind gusting sideways, was considered impossible by anyone who read the forums. Just as the target locked into place, the operator in the booth decided to have a little more fun. He keyed the microphone, his voice booming over the PA system for the entire facility to hear, announcing a live fire exercise by a walk-in guest, and inviting everyone to watch the demonstration of primitive techniques. He played a sound effect of a circus slide whistle over the speakers, reducing the tension of the moment to a slapstick comedy routine. People from the pistol bays and the clubhouse balcony drifted over, drinks in hand, expecting a spectacle of failure, their laughter creating a wall of noise designed to crush the focus of anyone standing on that line. Cyrus folded his arms. One shot. If you miss, pack up and clear the lane. We've got pros waiting. Kaylin didn't answer. She took the sling, looped it high on her left arm, settled into a stance that looked almost casual, feet offset, knees unlocked, rifle held loose until the last second. Marlowe shook his head. Posture's all wrong. She's gonna sway like a tree. Brant turned his back to the range, already dismissing her. I'm not even watching this train wreck. A few phones came up again. Someone started a quiet countdown under their breath. 10, 9, 8. Right at the count of 4, Brant's photographer fired off a rapid burst of flash photos directly in Kaylin's peripheral vision, the strobe light reflecting sharply off the glass partitions. It was a breach of every etiquette rule in the book, a calculated move to blind her momentarily and induce a flinch. The photographer lowered his camera with a smirk, checking his screen to see if he caught her wincing, but Kaylin's eyelids didn't even flicker. She absorbed the flash like she absorbed the insults, blinking once to clear the spots, her breathing rhythm unbroken, her pupil dilated and fixed on a target no one else could even see with the naked eye. Kaylin exhaled slow, the rifle settling as if it grew out of her shoulder. Her eyes narrowed slightly behind the rear sight, tracking the gusts by the way heat shimmer danced above the berm. At 3, she took up the slack in the trigger. At 0, the rifle cracked, sharp and clean, the report rolling down the valley like delayed thunder. For 2 full seconds, nothing happened. The crowd shifted, ready to laugh. Then, faint but unmistakable, the high ring of steel carried back on the wind. The monitor flashed green. Center hit. The silence that followed was broken by the tech investor, who slammed his hand on the counter and shouted that the sensor system was glitching. He pointed aggressively at the monitor, yelling that wind at that speed made the ballistics impossible for a cartridge of that age, demanding the range officer reset the faulty equipment. He looked around for validation, his face red, desperate to prove that the laws of physics he understood hadn't just been violated by a woman in a flannel shirt. He insisted they send a drone downrange to inspect the plate, refusing to believe his eyes, trying to rewrite reality rather than accept that he was in the presence of something superior. Every voice died mid-breath. Brant spun around so fast he almost stumbled. Cyrus's mouth opened, then closed. Marlowe stared at the screen like it had betrayed him. Kaylin stayed in position, bolt still closed, barrel steady. She worked the action once, chambering another round without hurry. Her voice carried just enough to reach the stunned cluster behind her. First one was hello. The sponsor with the cigar, sweat now beading on his forehead despite the AC, scoffed loudly, claiming it was a lucky flyer and that she couldn't replicate it in a million years. He doubled down, throwing his expensive gold lighter onto the pile of cash, sneering that if she was so confident, she should hit the 3-inch swinging chain holding the plate, not the plate itself. It was an impossible demand, a target smaller than a thumb at over half a mile, a shot that no one in their right mind would attempt even with a bench rest and a 20-power scope, let alone standing with iron sights in a crosswind. She fired again. Another clear ring, this time on a plate the booth had started swinging side to side just to be sure. Dead center again. But she didn't stop there. As the echo of the second shot faded, Kaylin shifted her weight imperceptibly and cycled the bolt for a third time, the sound of the metal action distinct in the breathless room. She didn't aim for the center mass this time. She tracked the oscillation of the swinging target, calculated the lag, and fired at the exact moment the plate reached the apex of its swing. The bullet didn't hit the plate, it severed the steel chain holding the left side. The target dropped violently, dangling by one link, spinning wildly in the wind. It was a display of precision so terrifyingly absolute that it went beyond skill and touched on something predatory. Marlowe's clipboard slipped from his fingers and clattered on the concrete. Brant's face had gone pale under his tan. One of the VIPs, an older man in a veteran's cap who'd stayed quiet the whole time, stood slowly. His eyes locked on Kaylin's stance, the way she held the rifle, the economy of every motion. Recognition flickered across his weathered face. Suddenly, the security guard who had dumped her bag earlier rushed forward, hand on his holster, shouting for her to put the weapon down, as if her competence was a threat. He breached the safety line, trying to physically intimidate her into submission, his ego unable to process the shift in power dynamics. He reached out to grab the barrel of her rifle, a violation that would get a man killed in the field, his face twisted in a mask of panic and authority. Desperate to regain control of a situation that had spiraled completely out of his understanding. The older veteran moved with a speed that belied his age, intercepting the guard's arm and twisting it behind his back with a bone-crunching fluidity. "Touch that rifle," the veteran growled, his voice a low rumble of command that froze the entire room. "And you'll be answering to the Department of Defense, not your shift supervisor." He shoved the guard back toward the wall and turned to the stunned crowd, his eyes hard as flint. "You idiots think this is a game? You're watching a ghost. There are maybe 3 people alive who can make that shot standing, and 2 of them are in classified graves." Brant found his voice first, but it cracked. "Equipment malfunction. Reset the target. Run diagnostics." Cyrus barked into his radio, demanding a full check. Technicians scrambled. Kaylin lowered the rifle at last, safed it, and set it on the bench. She reached into her canvas bag and drew out a flat metal card, dull titanium, edges worn from years in a pocket. She laid it on the shooting bench where the light caught the faint etching. A unit insignia most people in that room had never seen outside redacted documents. The veteran spoke first, voice low but carrying. "That program was shuttered 8 years ago. Records classified beyond TS. Nobody walks around with that tag unless..." He didn't finish. He didn't need to. The booth confirmed both hits. Wind data logged, no anomalies. Phones that had been recording the expected failure now captured something else entirely. The sponsor who had bet against her stood paralyzed, staring at the severed chain on the monitor, his cigar fallen to the floor and burning a hole in the carpet. He looked at the pile of cash and the gold lighter on the bench, then at Kaylin, waiting for her to claim it. Kaylin didn't even glance at the money. She picked up a single empty brass casing from the floor, set it on top of the stack of $100 bills as a paperweight, and turned her back on a fortune that meant less to her than the zero she had just confirmed. The insult of leaving the money behind stung the sponsor more than losing it ever could. It was a total rejection of his world, and everything he thought gave him value. Brant tried one last time. "Who the hell are you?" Kaylin picked up her brass, dropped it into a small pouch. "Doesn't matter." She zipped the rifle case, slung it over her shoulder. "I just needed to know the zero still held." She walked past them toward the exit. Nobody moved to stop her. Nobody dared speak. The veteran came to attention without thinking and held it until she passed. As she pushed through the glass doors, the valet Jared, who had forced her to walk up the hill, came sprinting from the kiosk, breathless and pale. He held her keys out with shaking hands, stammering an offer to bring her truck up to the front, to detail it for free, to do anything to erase the mistake he realized he'd made. Kaylin didn't break stride. She plucked the keys from his palm without making eye contact, walked past him, and began the long trek down to the gravel lot, leaving him standing there with his arm extended, looking small and foolish against the backdrop of the mountains. Word travels fast in tight circles. By evening, clips from the range cameras were circulating in private groups. Comments ranged from disbelief to quiet awe. Brant's scheduled exhibition the next weekend lost half its sponsors overnight. Brands suddenly reassessing partnerships. Marlowe got a call from corporate asking why an unregistered shooter had been allowed to upend the leaderboard. 2 weeks later, he was reassigned to a smaller facility 3 states away. Cyrus spent months trying to spin the story, but attendance dipped as word spread that Apex Ridge had mocked the wrong person on the wrong day. Kaylin never posted about it, never gave an interview. She drove back to her quiet place in the hills, cleaned the rifle, and hung it on the rack. Some nights she sat on the porch and watched the stars come out, the same way she had after missions nobody would ever thank her for. You know that feeling when the room finally sees you clear, not because you shouted, but because the truth spoke louder than any of them ever could. It doesn't erase the sting of being dismissed, being laughed at, being told you don't belong, but it does remind you that your worth was never up for their vote. You carried it the whole time, quiet and steady, waiting for the moment it rang out true. Where are you watching from? Leave a comment below and hit follow to walk with me through heartbreak, betrayal, and finally, healing.